Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. And this is our third part in our fundamentals of the electric grid. And today we're going to go ahead and move away from maybe some more of the technical points we've talked about to the broader picture of how these fundamentals are going to relate to what we're really interested in, which is electric resource planning. Just a quick reminder of who I am. My name is Andrew Kramer, and I lead the Ulteig Resource Planning Department. We offer a variety of services, including energy market modeling, integrated resource planning, capacity expansion evaluations, and rates and regulatory tariff impact. If you'd like to reach out to me and get in contact, my email address is listed right here on the screen, or you can add me on LinkedIn. I love to interact. It doesn't have to be all business. Maybe you just want to collaborate. Alternatively, as I say, if you do need our services or aren't certain and would like to know more, we're happy to talk to you anytime. We can get the meeting set up real quickly, and you can reach out to me directly if you'd like to do that. And with that said, let's go ahead and dive into our topics today. Today, we're going to go ahead and provide a brief overview of electric planning, resource planning. We've talked about that on the very first slide of this three-part series. We gave a one-slide intro to it. Today, we're going to go into a little bit more in-depth what it actually is. We'll discuss a few common misconceptions associated with electric resource planning, and we'll establish a footing that will allow us to move into energy market modeling, capacity expansion evaluations, and integrated system planning. Integrated resource planning being a subsidiary, or I should say, part of that. So our real goal is to get to these kind of what are the components of a formal electric resource plan. But in order to do that, as I say, we need to give you kind of that bigger picture first. So let's go into a brief introduction to electric resource planning. What exactly is this thing formally? Beyond that very first slide we did in the first discussion. So again, what is electric resource planning? Formally, electric resource planning is a combined engineering and economics optimization problem. That's a lot to digest there. What does that actually mean? So it's okay if you don't understand all of this. We're going to explain it later. Mathematically, it seeks to minimize system costs given a set of mathematical constraints in terms of principles from physics, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, and economics. So a lot goes into that. What we're really trying to do at the end of the day is minimize the cost of the system to what you can largely think of as on your power bill to you, the customer, given a set of mathematical constraints. As an example, perhaps we limit the amount of carbon we're allowing to produce, right? That's a hot topic right now, is the ability to potentially lower emissions. Can we get to net zero? Alternatively, generators cannot exceed their capacity level. So let's say we have a generator rated toward 500 megawatts. That's the amount of energy we can extract out on it, the demand at a given point in time. We can't have it producing 700 megawatts. That would violate the laws of physics, right? So at the end of the day, we have to actually respect that. Practically, it serves as a roadmap that may be used directly or indirectly in a regulatory or legal proceedings. It's when we go to act on these models that they become relevant. Andrew running a resource planning model and just doing it for the heck of it doesn't really matter. It doesn't influence anything. It's when someone takes it and says, I'm going to use this as the underpinnings to make an argument of what we should or should not do in terms of building or retiring resources on the system is when it becomes relevant. So who should be interested in electric resource planning? Well, there's a whole group of individuals, more than I could think of on here. This was just like a minute of me throwing some things down. Electric utilities, right? They need to know what they're going to build and what they're going to retire and how that impacts you, the customer. So I'd say first and foremost, electric utilities are very concerned about electric resource planning. Renewable storage and thermal developers, they want to know what's coming on the system. What opportunities are they going to have to build and, contribute to the system? They certainly are very interested in their finances and they want to build and help. So again, they're very interested in what's happening in terms of electric resource planning. Regulators, these are federal and state entities. They're going to approve the electric resource plans and the arguments in the legal proceedings of what we're allowed to build and what we're retiring. They pay very close attention to this. And as I say, that occurs at both the state and federal level. Trade and other interest groups. I have many friends in Sierra Club. They're an environmental advocacy organization, and they're very interested and follow these very closely. I've worked with them when I was still in the utilities. We would oftentimes talk shop and modeling and everything else. You also get trade organizations on the kind of the thermal side. Again, we have natural gas organizations and everyone else that are very interested in what's going on. They may want to influence the discussion, and certainly they need to know how much they're going to need to increase supply. So again, they're very interested in following these. The media, I'm certain it's every day you see discussions on recently things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Big Beautiful Bill. These are all popular points. They all relate to energy. You see probably lots of editorials. If you're on social media, you probably see lots of commentary one way or the other in terms of for or against specific types of technology. I think in general, the media, both social and the traditional media, are very interested in energy and associated electric resource planning. And finally, you, the general public, you probably have an interest in this as well. Me, you, and everyone else, right? What's going to be the cost on my electric bill? There's a lot of information out there. Some of it pretty scary at first glance. Are rates going to increase? Am I going to have to pay a lot more? Are they going to come down? What's going to be the future of the electric grid? Maybe, as I say, you're interested in from kind of a scientific point of curiosity, or maybe just a financial. All of these different parties have interests in terms of electric resource planning, and we're going to show you specifically how you're influenced by it and how you can potentially influence it as well, just from knowledge and the overall what we call stakeholder engagement process as we go through this broader discussion on electric resource planning. So what must be included in electric resource planning? What makes it that? What's its essence, more or less? We'll review at a high level the mathematics associated with electric system resource planning later. That's when we get into some of the equations and stuff. Now, it won't be too complicated, but we'll make it a little bit more formal. However, one thing we can say is valid electric resource plans must be reliable. Well, what do we mean by reliability? Within the optimization problem, that's the kind of the mathematical piece we talked about earlier, load shed is typically not allowed. That's basically saying, hey, let's just cut customers off. In the United States, we don't like it when we go to turn on our light switch and the power doesn't come on, right? So certainly we're not going to allow just like blacking out cities, right? That's not valid resource planning. We also have a lot of additional requirements as specified by the independent system operators. We'll introduce who those guys are later and what they do. And similar regulating agencies. There's state, federal, and then, as I say, kind of the broader regional level, which is the independent system operators or ISOs. This means the model must match generational load for every time interval. Okay, we can't have the load going much higher than generation. We're blacking customers out. That's not valid. And we have also a bunch of specific requirements related to capacity obligation. That's an additional safety valve in terms of reserve margin and generation and the firm generation levels. We'll introduce all of this later as we go along. Electric resource planning can help provide guidance in an uncertain world. So this kind of maybe helps answer our question of why we're interested in this. What's the end effect of all of this math and these numbers we put out at the end of the day? There are frequently claims made based on non-technical arguments regarding solutions in energy, but often key facts are distorted. So again, you might probably see things like on social media or the news media, and you might question, well, is that really true or not? Electric resource planning is going to help you understand what those numbers and arguments are and if they're valid or not. Again, kind of you, the viewer, gets to decide based on the tools we're going to give you. Electric resource planning can help provide guidance, but this discipline does not produce a single world. Rather, it studies risk. So anyone that comes to you and tell you, I've got the perfect resource plan, this is it. This is the one technology, the one thing we need, you should be a little suspicious of that because the world is inherently uncertain. Presidential elections, more dramatically wars, environmental restrictions, or just supply and demand. These have big impacts on electric resource plans, and we have to account for uncertainty of these when we go to develop them. So again, anyone that kind of tells you that there's just one preferred plan, one technology, you should raise an eyebrow on that. There's lots of different alternatives. And kind of to this end, we need to be careful, and you see a lot of this right now in these discussions, where energy and how we influence the generation fleet, what's being brought online, maybe it's solar and renewables or natural gas, or, maybe we're keeping a coal plant online. It's important to step away from a lot of times what you see in this view of that there is a winner and loser, and I'm going to get you, I'm going to retire this, or I'm going to build this, and I'm winning because I'm building this. Really, all of these electric resource plans and what we're building are governed by the laws of physics and economics. They're influenced by policies and elections, but they're not wholly determined by it. And we'll see later that regardless of who's in office and what we're doing, there are certain laws and requirements we have to respect. And that's why we're going to continue to see a variety of resources. The question is just more of what is the blend as opposed to if there's going to be variety. It's just going to be what's the split between them. So they're trying to kind of get that view of, I get you, you get me. That's not really beneficial for anybody. We'll see how maybe resource planning can get us away from that. Before exploring how we can help resolve various conflicts in energy, let us first look at some often misused approximations of dedicated electric resource planning. I want to touch upon two here. As I said, because these are, if you've ever spent any time on LinkedIn, you see a lot of posts on these and kind of making its round whenever they provide an update. And again, a lot of times seeing it used as this winner and loser discussion. And we're going to see why that's not really accurate, that there's a better way of looking at this and what these kind of approximations to resource planning, how they are and aren't useful. So I want to provide one of my favorites. I am very enthusiastic about it. I keep an eye on it, but I also keep in mind it has some real limitations, and that is the levelized cost of energy, or the average cost to produce a specific type of energy out of a given technology, whether that be natural gas, solar, wind, coal, nuclear. And here is a famous picture you're going to see a lot of times. If you spend any time on LinkedIn, and whenever Lazard, they're one of the best in the business at this, whenever they issue their new annual report on energy costs, a lot of times you see this making the round. This one's not complete. You should also have natural gas turbines up here. And what you'd see if there were natural gas prices on here, you'd see that solar is getting down to the point where a lot of times it wins on a dollar per megawatt basis. And I just use that terrible word wins, right? It's hard to get away from. It is arguably more cost effective on a levelized cost of basis perspective. That's what we should say there to make it formal. Well, what does that really mean? And as I say, a lot of times you kind of see this point in discussions and arguments of saying, this is it. This proves what I've been trying to say. Well, there's some pretty real limitations out that Lazard provides, and they make that clear. A lot of times I think it's the confusion and the excitement that leads to this information being miscommunicated. Let's talk about what it specifically means and the limitations for it. Lazard's annual LCOE Plus report is an excellent resource, but is often misunderstood. Individuals may use the report to produce misleading conclusions. Remember, it basically produces an average dollar per megawatt hour across the whole system in a world, and this is pretty important, where we assume we have no transmission limitations and that there is unlimited capacity. That's the ability to match generation of load for every hour. As an example, let's just say we're doing a mass build out of solar. That's wonderful. That's great. It might be cheapest on a levelized cost of energy basis. But if you get to the point where you retire a lot of base load and you don't have enough generation at night, that may undervalue your capacity. So there's a whole lot of asterisks associated with this. What I would say of levelized cost of energy, it provides a very good high-level look at what's going on for trends under that set of conditions that we don't have any transmission restrictions and there's no problems with capacity. When we get into discussions about resources during times of need, the need to match generation of load exactly, or close, so we don't see too much of a frequency deviation, that's what we learned last time, we need a different set of tools. We need a more precise set of tools. And that leads us into the formal simulations used in electric resource planning, you might say. So again, I've seen people argue that saying levelized cost of energy is everything. That's not true. Again, it gives us that 500-mile high look. I've seen others come back and say more on the reliability side, saying it's useless, it's bad. In fact, it's even misleading. We should get rid of it. Well, I don't agree with that approach either, because I like to have that 500-mile high look. The incoming trends of what's happening is important. As an example, the fact that renewables have come down in price a lot on a levelized cost of energy basis and are oftentimes very competitive against natural gas and thermal resources is important. That helps us understand there might be a basis for building these when we get into the formal resource planning. So again, useful from a high-level view, but not valid enough to actually do formal resources of exactly what we should build and what we should retire. We need something more precise. Another misconception a lot of times we see is what we call capacity factor. And this is one of my favorites because it's used incorrectly all over the place. A lot of times just people get very excited and they don't understand what this thing actually means. And let's show a picture here of a graph. This figure is a little bit outdated, but the physics of capacity factor really haven't changed all that much. What capacity factor tells you is it tells you how much generation you're producing over a given time interval versus the theoretical rating of it. So again, if I had the maximum I could get out of this generation source, if I take what I'm actually getting out of that and divide by the maximum, that's your capacity factor. So resources like nuclear here that are oftentimes running, for various reasons we'll touch on later, nuclear units are what we call baseload. We like them to be running continuously. They tend to have very high capacity factors. Beneath that, you also have coal and natural gas turbines. The reason is we don't really like to cycle them. Once they're turned on, we like to keep them online. Beneath that, we have more on the thermal side, natural gas peaking units. These tend to be turned on when the prices are very high or there are system emergencies. Kind of in between them, we have wind, hydro, and solar, more or less. Now, you need to be a little bit careful here because you might look at this graph and say, well, I'm going to draw a bunch of conclusions on this. And I've seen people, very smart people on the economic side, kind of get the engineering muddled up and try to use capacity factor as the end-all be-all argument for reliability. We're going to see why that's not the case. I'm going to give you an example here. The previous graph, although dated, may make you think wind is worse than thermal generation, or that natural gas peaking units have no place in supporting the electric grid. There's nothing further from the truth in this. Wind is not inherently worse than natural gas because, as I say, it's lower on the capacity side. It's oftentimes less available. On a levelized cost of energy basis, it is a lot of times the best resource to build. Or as I say, formally more on the electric resource planning side, when we go into match generation of load and what we can and can't do, wind is a preferred resource a lot of times in terms of the actual cost benefits that we see coming out of it. So don't think that wind is worse than these resources here. It's just different. It has limitations, no doubt, but these other thermal resources have limitations as well, which we're going to touch upon as we go along on this. Likewise, I think a very strong conclusion that can be seen out here is look at how little these units are running. We don't even need them. Let's phase them out. During times of need, when the system's really in trouble, these natural gas peaking units will be the difference between you having your lights turned on and a blackout. So again, these units, just because they're not running, have a low capacity factor very often, doesn't mean they're not important. In reality, capacity factor is much like levelized cost of energy, and that tells you broad average information. It tells you average operations data, but does not tell you anything about the quantification of reliability impact directly. And I can give you a thought experiment. Again, if the gas peaking units and wind was maybe a little bit too esoteric, let me give you an example for solar, which kind of sits somewhere between the gas peaking units and natural gas units in terms of capacity factor. You might look at this graph and again, just kind of envision solar somewhere kind of in here and imagine saying, okay, well, I can just build enough solar in terms of capacity factor and I can replace a nuclear facility. Well, in part that might be true. But let's say we do that for all of the coal, all of the natural gas, and all of the nuclear facilities in the United States. If you do that, you're going to get to a point where the solar doesn't run at night. It still has an average okay capacity factor, but people don't like it when they go down at night and they can't turn their light switches on, right? When their heating unit gives out in summer or in winter, or their air conditioner turns off, right? Capacity factor is an incomplete view because it really doesn't tell you the ability to match generational load. That's why it's a limited. It's an average information tool. And as I say, people don't like it, as they say in the United States, when they go to turn their light switches on and they can't get power out of it. If we did all that analysis based on capacity factor and blacked them out in the middle of the night, they wouldn't like that. That's why when we get into discussions like solar and doing lots of build out for it, we have to start talking about storage and pairing that with natural gas turbines and base load and nuclear and all these sorts of different discussions. It's a very complicated optimization problem. As they say, there is no one technology that's just going to single-handedly solve everything for us. So we're going to see that as we go along, why this happens and why capacity factor is a limit and how we have to do formal resource planning as we go along, formal electric resource planning, I should say. Let me give you a concluding point here to the first of these three-part modules we had. As we start moving into that broader picture of what is energy market modeling, integrated resource planning, when we get into formal electric resource planning. Electric resource planning, no doubt, is a broad topic and includes many different models and worlds. We're going to cover all these shortly, as I just said. Anyone that tells you there's one preferred generation technology or there is a single answer to what is the best choice is either confused or kind of wishing to advance a position. And what I would say is, let's say you are trying to advance a position. Let's say you have a decarbonization goal, which is, can be very noble. Be aware, though, you want to be armed with the facts of what the limits are of the technologies you might be looking at, the clean energy technologies. People that are more on the reliability side, people such as myself, that seek to remain very neutral on these various forms of technology, will be looking to see if you understand the pros and cons, the limits of what you're talking about with your analysis. If you come to me with one set plan, one technology, saying, here's what it says, I've got a levelized cost of energy, it's the cheapest thing in the world, I'm going to raise all sorts of technical points. If you stick with me through all the various teaching modules and everything else we're going to do, even if you have an advocacy position, you're going to be able to understand the limits of what the various technologies you are looking at are and make much better arguments. So I say, even if you are advocating for something, understand the engineering realities, and you're going to be listened to a lot more than someone that doesn't, and say it just kind of pushes for one thing. And to this end, I'm going to conclude with our point from a quote from George Box, which I love. All models are wrong, but some are useful. None of these are models I'm talking about. Levelized cost of energy, capacity factor, or even the formal mathematics of electric resource planning are oracles into the future. They're not perfect. That's why these models, if they're valid, tell you the highs and lows, the risks, the uncertainty. It's a mixed bag of opinions and options and everything else. So take that away here, that anything I provide you, I'm going to provide the uncertainty for it and what may or may not happen. That is how we do valid electric resource planning. I know inherently the models I'm producing, not one of them is going to be right, but that does not mean they're not useful. We're going to produce information that can be actionable based upon an uncertain world. And to that point, a quote from our friends here at Monty Python, which is, remember, it's only a model at the end of the day. It's not, say, the ultimate truth of the universe. As we move into our next part, we're going to go ahead and dive into the formal details of electric resource planning and all those various modules I've talked about earlier. We're going to get into integrated resource planning, nodal market simulations, energy market modeling simulations. But in the meantime, I hope you comment below if you have any thoughts, maybe you have questions. We'll get back to you if you want to. Please reach out to us. You can also talk to me directly. Here's my contact information. And in the description, we'll have a link to my LinkedIn as well. Please add me there. I love to talk, just collaborate, talk theory, talk shop. And you might be interested in our services here as Ulteig as well. We'd love to talk to you as well. Or you can just reach out to us for maybe fact-finding kind of information. With that said, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to discuss things with you soon.